Horizon Forbidden West sees us return to the shoes of heroine Aloy in her post-apocalyptic, prehistoric sci-fi world. Can something be prehistoric and post-apocalyptic? Probably not. Whatever, you fight robot dinosaurs with a bow and arrow. I have to say, I feel a little sorry for the Horizon games. They just have the worst timing. Zero Dawn came out within a week of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and Forbidden West has landed bang up against Elden Ring. But credit to developer Guerrilla Games, the Horizon series has definitely made its own mark, thanks to their shiny AAA graphics, colourful open worlds, and the enjoyably ridiculous story that makes robot dinosaurs not seem that far-fetched. And here Forbidden West picks up roughly where Zero Dawn left off. Aloy's now on a mission to stop the spread of this red blight, and overall it's a good story. But there were a few things that held back the adventure from true greatness. Aloy's been keeping everyone at arm's length, as she's been too busy saving the world.
I mean, I'd ask you to join, but who'll be left to save the world, right?
But that makes her and the characters around her just a bit hard to connect with. There's also one point where she straight up attacks a peaceful village, more or less just because the people wouldn't instantly agree to help her, which felt a touch extreme.
Now you have to join Hikaru.
The whole thing is very dialogue heavy too. You'll spend a lot of the game simply listening to people spout exposition. Every few minutes of gameplay are bookended with long stretches of just talking, often with the option of even more talking. While I'm sure some enjoy the ability to work through a whole dialogue wheel of exposition, I was glad it was at least optional. But I have to commend the excellent performances, and just how much effort has gone into injecting some story into everything. Even for the simplest little fetch quests, there's always a bit of story behind why you're doing what you're doing. And I enjoyed how the side quests often built on each other as parts of wider subplots. Still, it's an absolute yapathon. Even outside of cutscenes, Aloy and the other characters almost never stop talking.
This floor panel activated something.
Yes, I can see that, Aloy.
To the right, I think.
And now to the left.
Oh, thanks. I never would have figured that out by myself. Even underwater with her mouth full, she's still talking.
Actually, great down here.
Sure, her chatter can be useful if something isn't that obvious, but mostly it feels hand-holdy and borderline patronizing. The story also tends to feel like a bit of a MacGuffin chase. You're just being pulled along to find the thing that will activate that thing so you can then go save the thing. Still, it had just enough over-the-top sci-fi silliness and intrigue to keep me invested and wanting to see the credits roll. And special shout out to Lance Reddick's character Silence. I perked up every time he showed up, as he masterfully plays the role of not quite villain.
How could I set a trap inside?
What are you up to, you mysterious and lovable rogue, you? Gameplay-wise, not much has changed from the first game. There's still a lot of exploration with a giant, beautiful, and varied open world to wander around, now with some gorgeous underwater sections too. Your movement around the world has been improved a bit thanks to things like a glider and more freedom in what you can climb. Although to use an old good game phrase, Aloy handles a bit wonky-donkey. She's got a bit of momentum to her turns and movements that often had me getting her stuck on little bits of the world for a moment. And you now have a device called the Pullcaster that lets you grapple to specific points. But I almost wish I could just grapple to everything all the time. Level design and jumping puzzles be damned, because there is a lot of climbing and jumping. Personally, I'm kind of over climbing in games. If I never have to slowly climb up another cliff face, I'll be a happy man. At the very least, make the climbing a bit like Uncharted so everything blows up. Here, this is about as exciting as it gets. That mix of ranged and melee combat also returns with some notable tweaks. Melee combat now has some combos for a bit more depth, and you can now equip Valor Surge abilities. These are basically special buffs you can activate that do things like increasing range damage or giving you some temporary invisibility.
But I didn't find these made a big difference in combat, and I honestly forgot I even had them half the time.
Unlike the powerful weapon techniques you now have, which I used as much as I could. These let you do things like load 3 arrows at once, or even line up very powerful explosive shots. Enemies, especially the bigger robots, can feel a tad bullet spongy, although I suppose you are taking on giant mechanical monstrosities with sharp sticks fired from a string, so that makes sense. And you do get markedly more lethal as you get more weapons and tools in your arsenal. It's decently challenging combat, and it all led to plenty of satisfying encounters. You'll end up trying to use every tool in your tool belt, from setting up ambushes, frantically targeting weak spots, and making sure to use elemental damage effectively. That said, the combat is very scrappy. I'm not the biggest fan of having to constantly switch weapons and craft ammo mid-fight. It just breaks the flow of the combat. The camera can also get lost in the fray at times, and the timing for dodges feels a bit unclear, which led to me getting knocked down and stunned a frustrating amount. The aiming also feels a little stiff. I think because there's no aim assist, or at the very least it's so subtle to the point of feeling like there's none. They do compensate for that by giving you a slow-mo ability, but you'll have to use it to stand any chance of hitting the weak spots on fast-moving foes. Still, it all works quite well, and it's hard to deny the thrill of fighting giant freaking robots. You can also take the stealth route very often too. You can track patrol routes, get quick stealth kills, override beasts to fight for you, or just do some extra damage when attacking from stealth. I'm more of a get in there and make it explode kind of guy, but it's always great to have options, right? Speaking of options, there's also a healthy dose of RPG mechanics here. Completing missions and activities and taking down enemies all reward XP and upgrade points that you can spend on improving Aloy's stats and abilities. While I appreciate having these RPG elements to flesh things out, it does have a slightly bloated set of upgrade trees that didn't feel that exciting to work through. Many of the upgrades either seem to offer pretty minor improvements, or they unlock very specific skills that I didn't feel like I was ever going to really use. But let's quickly talk graphics now, as this is very much one of those showcase games, and there's no denying it can be absolutely stunning. Character models can especially look amazing. There's lots of great mocap and animations, and there is a ton of detail in the world to admire. And as is becoming standard for many Sony exclusives, it has an excellent photo mode. My only real complaint with the graphics is there's a bit of a fuzzy fizziness to it all. It's something the developers have patched to reduce, but it was still noticeable to me. Also, whatever Aloy's using in her hair, it's giving it so much body that it seemed to have gained sentience. I have to admit, I think there was some open world fatigue on my part going into this, and this has an absolutely massive world filled with stuff to do, which isn't a criticism. A big world with lots of content, you'd love to see it, but just looking at this giant icon-filled map filled me with existential dread about how much of my life this world would eat. And speaking of the world, it felt a touch artificial to me, which I suppose is ironic given the premise. But it feels like a game world with everything in its game place, coming across more like a huge movie set than an organic, unpredictable, and believable world. It was just lacking some of those surprising interactions or moments I love to see in open world games, like in Skyrim when a dragon randomly shows up in the middle of a fight. And it probably didn't help that it feels like a retread of other open world games I've already played. It's a little Assassin's Creed, a bit Breath of the Wild, and a bit Tomb Raider, and not substantially different from the first Horizon. I also jumped into this right after playing through Elden Ring, and that's a tough act for any game to follow. There is a lot to like here though, and outside of a few little bugs I hit, like a guy spawning inside the ground, or me getting stuck inside the ground myself, it's a well-polished AAA adventure, and if you're the type who likes to get a lot of hours out of your game purchases, this will keep you busy. Ultimately, I'd compare it to a big Marvel movie in a way. It's made almost to an exact formula of what it thinks people like, and you can't deny that it's confidently made, it looks expensive, and you know you're going to get your money's worth of action out of it, and by now it's something you know whether you're going to like or not. So if you just want some spectacle with some familiar action and a fun story, it'll absolutely leave you satisfied. Play. On the other hand, if you're a bit burnt out on sprawling open world games, this doesn't do anything you probably haven't seen before. So unless you're here for the story, you could skip this without really missing much. Pass. But I don't think it would be fair to leave it on that. I mean, look at this. It's a beautiful and entertaining robot dino fueled romp. Play. Or pass if you want, but you should probably play. Definitely 100% probably worth a play. I miss the days of just being able to give a game a 7 or an 8. Whatever. This came out months ago anyway. You've all already made up your minds.
And so at daybreak.
Hey! Shh.